Hi, good afternoon. My name is Karen Antone. I'm the project director for the statewide technical assistance and resource team, or START project. I would like to welcome everyone to the presentation, Strategies for Success, What Parents Need to Know About Quality Inclusion for All Children. Debbie is going to start our webinar with a brief poll to find out who's in our audience today. Debbie?
Okay, thank you, Karen. Okay, so let's find out who's in the room. Please choose one answer. I am attending the webinar as a parent or guardian, a general education teacher, a special education teacher, school or district administrator, or something else. I'm going to leave this open for a few seconds while everybody enters their answer. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. It looks like most of you are parents, so that's great. Thank you. I hope that you get a lot out of what we'll be speaking about today. Now, the second question that I have to ask everyone is, how old are your children or the children that you work with? Are they in preschool, grades K to 2, grades 3 to 5, 6 to 8, or 9 to 12 or above? Okay, I see about 61% of you have voted. I'm going to give you a couple more seconds. See if we can get some more answers. Uh, 75%. Thank you very much for participating. It makes it a lot more fun when people get involved in what we're doing. It gives us a little bit more feedback too. I appreciate it. 81% of you have voted. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close the polls in 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to share the results with you. So it looks like most of you are grades 3 to 5. That's pretty interesting, actually. And I hope that you will get a lot of information, useful information, out of our presentation today. So I'm going to hide that. Okay, Karen?
Okay. The START project is funded by the New Jersey Department of Education, Office of Special Education Professional Development, and offers programs and services that support the engagement of families to improve outcomes for students, including developing and supporting special education, parent advisory, and support groups in communities and school districts. We help parents to become informed and active participants in their child's education, partner with educators in improving educational programs for students with disabilities, and particularly in the area of inclusion, and start and strengthen special education parent advisory groups or parent support groups in your area. Okay. I would like to introduce the START team. There's a parent group specialist covering every county to assist parents and professionals with developing special education parent advisory groups, or CPAGs, and other parent groups throughout New Jersey. Presenting today will be myself, Karen Antone, Stephanie Babbitts, Debbie Esposito, and Brenda Figueroa, who will share her personal story of inclusion for her son from out-of-district to middle school inclusion. Tatiana DeGrossa and Monique DeJay-Wilson will be monitoring the chat box and the questions today. I would like to introduce Stephanie for the next slide.
Good afternoon, everyone. Over the course of the next hour, you're going to learn how inclusion benefits all children. You will become familiar with strategies and resources that enable families and educators to work collaboratively to create goals to support inclusion. You will hear from a parent, Brenda, and her experience with inclusion for her son, Norberto. Lastly, we will identify next steps for creating an inclusive climate in schools. Now Debbie will ask another poll question. Debbie?
Thank you, Stephanie. So, let's see. So what we're what we'd like to know right now is what is the percentage of the day your child is included with their typical peers? Would you say 80% or more of the entire school day, between 40 and 80% of the entire school day, less than 40% of the entire school day, or you're not sure, you don't know? So you can click whichever response is most appropriate. Okay. So at this point, about 65% of you have voted. And give it a couple more seconds because I know everybody here is not here as a parent, but so we have about 70%. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'll share the results with you. So it's looking like about 44% of you. That's the highest percentage. 44% of you have 80% or more of your children participating with their non-disabled peers, and I think that's great. So I'm going to give it back to, who's next? I'm going to give it back to Karen. Okay, Karen.
Okay, so why do we include? Inclusion is an attitude and approach that seeks to ensure that every person, regardless of ability or background, can meaningfully participate in all aspects of life. Our goal is to prepare our children to lead inclusive, productive, and meaningful lives in their community. Eventually, your kids are going to grow up, and eventually you will grow older as well. The decisions you make now affect the future and the potential for choice your child has and can have when he or she becomes an adult. Inclusion works. Inclusion leads to better outcomes academically and socially. Inclusion works when your child's a baby, in pre-K, in elementary, middle, and yes, even in high school, and inclusion works for adults as well. It's that simple. And all of this is backed by years and years of research. We will now discuss some of the benefits of inclusion for children with disabilities. Providing inclusive opportunities leads to a life where people with disabilities are valued because differences are respected and tolerance exists. Inclusion leads to a real circle of friends for individuals with disabilities, friends who are there because they want to be there, not because they are family or because they are paid. Inclusion leads to the individual with disabilities finding his or her own interests, hobbies, and even bigger and more important, their dreams. And because they have been raised in a challenging environment, individuals with disabilities who have been included flourish within these interests and dreams and can honestly and earnestly work toward their own dreams. Inclusion also leads to a more independent life. This can mean independent housing, independent self-care, full and more robust choices. Also, families are more integrated into the community when their children are included. Inclusion can also lead to a far better and broader employment choice and opportunity. So no studies conducted since the late 1970s have shown that there's an academic advantage for students with intellectual or other developmental disabilities educated in separate settings. So if you're interested in that research, it's FALVEY, FALVEY of 2004. And also I'd like to mention we do have in our handouts, if you look in your control panel, a one-page sheet on the benefits of inclusion, and that's an excellent resource to bring to your IEP meetings. So research shows when students with different support needs learn together, they experience better academic and behavioral outcomes, better social relationships, high school graduation rates, and post-school success. This quote is from swiftschools.org. SWIFT is a national K-8 technical assistance center that builds school capacity to provide academic and behavioral support to improve outcomes for all students. The link for SWIFT will be in your chat box. Okay, now we'll talk about some benefits of parent involvement. So remember, you and your child are important members of the IEP team. Some of the benefits of having a collaborative team are that each member has ownership and commitment to the goals. The implementation of plans are much more successful. Shared knowledge and expertise increase individualization of goals to meet the needs of the student, and new ideas are generated through group interaction that might not be generated through individual work. So working together, a lot of times people can come up with ideas and feed off of each other and come out with really great plans and goals. Also, remember, your child's a part of the team and a member of the team and should be a part of the conversation. Communication between parents in the school is really so important and shouldn't be overlooked. It's important to create a positive relationship with your team. And also, research shows our kids do better when we as parents are active and involved. When you have a child with a disability, being prepared, present, and participating are so very critical. If you want your child's inclusive opportunities to be real and meaningful, then your involvement needs to be real and meaningful. The best way to show your child what inclusion is to be included and involved yourself. We'd like to begin with some terms to ensure that everyone's familiar. So if you look in your upper left-hand corner, you can see an exclusion. Exclusion occurs when students are denied access to students without disabilities. Private schools for the disabled and homeschooling are examples.
Private schools for the disabled and homeschooling are examples of exclusion. Separation or segregation occurs when the education of students with disabilities is provided in separate environments in isolation from students without disabilities. Examples include self-contained classrooms, resource rooms. This and exclusion are the restrictive environments. Integration is a process of placing persons with disabilities in general education or inclusion classrooms, quote unquote, as long as the students with disabilities can adjust to the standardized requirements. Inclusive education means that all students attend and are welcomed by their neighborhood schools in appropriate general education classrooms where they are supported to learn, contribute, and participate in all aspects of the life of the school. Inclusive education is about how we develop and design our schools, classrooms, programs, and activities so that all students learn and participate together. IDEA does not use the term inclusion. However, IDEA does require school districts to place students in the least restrictive environment, or LRE. In your handouts, you'll find the law supporting LRE and inclusion. Inclusion has come to be preferred primarily because it implies that students with disabilities are considered part of the general education classroom. Inclusion means that children and youth with disabilities or special health care needs are actively participating in recreational, social, educational, and developmental opportunities along with their peers without disabilities. It is important to remember that inclusion is not an approach. That inclusion is an approach. It's not a program or a placement. Where LRE is the placement, the primary placement is in the general education classroom, although instruction may also be provided in other settings based on the student's needs. A student with a disability is not removed from the age-appropriate general education classroom solely based on needed modifications to the general education curriculum. Your child does not need to be quote-unquote ready or able to do the same work as their general education peers. So I'm going to go ahead and do another poll. And this time I would like to know, what are some of the barriers that might be preventing you from including your children? And please check all that apply. Would you say lack of classroom supports? That is, I'm afraid my child won't keep up. The IEP team is not supportive or doesn't think that your child will succeed. Are you afraid your child might be bullied? Or you didn't have enough information, you didn't know that your child could be included? Or finally, that your child has behaviors that you think may be disruptive in a typical classroom? And like I said, please check all that apply. I'll give you another couple seconds, another minute or two, another second or two. So about 60% of you have voted. I can see that you're thinking about this one carefully.
Hmm.
And it bears that. So think about the reasons maybe that you haven't included your children, if you haven't. Okay, so 65% of you have voted. I'm going to go ahead and close the polls because there were, I think, about 40% of you who said that your children were included, and that's wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results. And it looks like 69% of you, or most of you, think that feel like you have lack of classroom support. Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to address that as we go further into the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the poll, and we're going to continue. So, what is supported inclusion? High expectations for all students receiving an education that meets their individual needs. Back to the IEP, individual needs. Bringing supports and services to students where they need them in the classroom, including GT classes and programs, advanced placement classes. Our students should not be excluded if they qualify, especially for National Honor Society, after-school clubs and programs and events like proms, class trips, extracurricular activities. All these are included when we talk about inclusive opportunities. These are some of the many opportunities that will support our children socially and will help prepare our students for life after high school. Providing training and support and planning time to teachers that help them teach with confidence. This is all under the heading of supported inclusion. Focusing on students' strengths and abilities. Students educated with their peers in their neighborhood schools. There should not be inclusive classrooms, quote unquote. There should only be classrooms. So, what inclusive education is not? Inclusive education is not providing supports and services only in special education settings. It's not general education teachers teaching students with disabilities without support and expecting students to be able to do the same work as their peers. Don't let, quote unquote, being ready hold your child back. Every child can be ready with the proper supports. Focusing on student weaknesses. It's not focusing on student weaknesses. Placement determined by disability label. Placement determined by disability label. For example, quote unquote, autism rooms or rooms for kids with Down syndrome. Those are placement determined by disability label without meeting the individual needs of the child. Available resource spaces or administrative convenience. Taking away the IEP or other services. Excluding students because they cannot access the full curriculum. Just because your child can't add quickly does not mean they can't be accommodated with a calculator. To access a math class. Required readings can be adapted with leveled readers. It's about exposure, not requiring the same level of reading. This is how a student with a 3rd grade level can be included in an 8th grade or higher class. Stephanie will now share some tips to build the IEP to support inclusion.
Thank you, Debbie.
Mm-hmm.
The development of the IEP is a critical step that the team can take to communicate goals and share strategies that will support inclusion. Careful planning of the IEP meeting is essential when designing the services needed to support the child successfully. When the team is focused on planning for an inclusive placement, they should focus on including as much information as possible in the IEP about the necessary supports needed so the child can participate successfully in the general education classroom. We begin by looking at the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, also known as the PLAF. The PLAF is the cornerstone of the IEP. It identifies the child's specific needs and establishes a baseline to begin the process of developing meaningful and measurable goals. It not only drives the IEP, but it links all of the IEP components together. A well-written PLAF should include your child's strengths and weaknesses, what helps your child learn, what limits or interferes with your child's learning, objective data from current evaluations of your child, parental concerns, and how your child's disability affects his or her ability to be involved and progress in the general education curriculum. Next slide. In your handouts is a 4-page document known as a positive student profile. This is a great tool for you and your child to fill out and share with the IEP team. This information is important to help your team understand your child's interests and what will connect them to the curriculum, match with students with similar interests, and offer opportunities for inclusion in clubs and activities. Document times where inclusion has worked successfully for your child. Include input from family members, friends, and others who know your child. Think about the types of environments or supports that your child needs to learn new skills. List what methods are necessary to teach your child appropriate skills. And think of how your child will use new skills to increase opportunities to participate in the classroom and in the community. And now Debbie's going to talk about goals and objectives.
Thank you, Stephanie. Annual goals are statements that identify what knowledge and skills a student is expected to be able to demonstrate from the time the IEP is implemented until the next scheduled review. A student's IEP goals must be clearly measurable. For example, let's look at this example from Wright's Law. It's not enough to say, Kelsey will demonstrate improved writing skills. The goal must be addressed, the goal must address the student's unique needs arising from his or her disability. An improvement might sound something like this. Kelsey will improve her writing and spelling skills so she can write a clear, cohesive, and readable paragraph consisting of at least 3 sentences, including compound and complex sentences that are clearly related. That's what we call something that's measurable. Goals set standards for what the child will learn and achieve under the proposed program. Think of goals that reflect your priorities and think of ways that each of those goals could be taught in a regular education classroom environment. Keep the IEP meaningful. Don't just copy and paste from year to year. Remember, the IEP is a working document. Begin with a few important manageable goals and focus on the areas that are most meaningful for your child. When thinking about a more inclusive classroom experience, a few tips might include something like this. As you develop goals, include phrases like, quote, with typical peers used for support, or with one prompt from a typical child, or something like, in the presence of children without disabilities. Obviously, once these goals are adopted, or they can only be implemented in an inclusive placement. Also be thinking about, is the goal age appropriate? In determining how appropriate a goal might be, choose those that may interest a typical student the age of your child. What methods are necessary to teach? Think about also what methods are necessary to teach my child appropriate skills. We'll be suggesting answers to this question in the next section on supplementary aid, so I won't go into it now. But this is something that you need to be thinking about when you're developing goals. Also, how will my child use the new skills to increase opportunities to to participate in the communities. Document times where inclusive opportunities outside of the classroom have worked successfully for your child. Video or photograph family vacations, church activities, etc. Request that evaluations be done by people with expertise in or some form of experience with supported education. Remember that evaluation results often include placement recommendations. Ask the evaluator to include a description of accommodations and supports that will enable your child to participate successfully with typical peers. Remember that if you disagree with these results, you also have the right to ask for an independent evaluation. In the end, IEP goals should allow a child to participate in and have access to the general education curriculum while focusing on his or her individual needs. All students can be educated in a general education setting with the appropriate supports. As educators and families recognize the benefits of an inclusive setting, they can begin to work together to make inclusive placements a reality. Where a child is educated is one of the most important educational decisions a team can make. It is essential that teams work together. That is child study teams, parents, and children where appropriate, to purposefully create successful IEPs so that students with disabilities have full access to the general education curriculum alongside their peers without disabilities.
So now we're going to talk about related services, and related services can be inclusive as well. It's common to see a student who's included for the majority of the day but receives his or her related services like speech and language, occupational therapy, physical therapy, recreational therapy, etc., in a pull-out model. Pulling students from the classroom can be quite detrimental to learning and social relationships. Instead of removing the student from general education classrooms to work on speech and language goals, consider having the particular goal met during the reading language arts time with the support of a speech teacher. Or, instead of a student working on a goal like learning to tell time in a resource room, have the student be responsible for the class agenda or alerting the class when it's time to go to music class. Sipping practice can be done by taking a coat on and off before or after recess, and organizational skills can be practiced when gathering materials. Social skills can be practiced in cooperative groups while learning science. These are all examples of goals being addressed in natural environments and leading to meaningful outcomes. When focusing on a student's individual needs, IEP goals should allow for access to the general curriculum as well as supporting active participation. Stephanie will now share information on supplementary aids and services.
Thank you, Karen. IDEA defines supplementary aids and services as aids, services, and other supports that are provided in regular education classes, other education-related settings, and in extracurricular and non-academic settings to enable children with disabilities to be educated with non-disabled children to the maximum extent possible. The IEP team should give careful consideration to a full range of options of supplementary aids and services, including assistive technology, environmental accommodations, staff support, alternative presentation of content, behavioral support, modified assignments, and parent training. Successful inclusive programs include professional development for both special education and general education teachers. When teachers are trained and have access to appropriate resources and supports, students with disabilities are more likely to succeed within the general education classroom. Another component of the IEP that IDEA requires is specifying how the child's progress will be measured. Reports are a way to monitor a student's progress toward the annual goals and to evaluate the effectiveness of the student's special education services. It is extremely important that parents pay attention to these progress reports. If you see that certain goals have not been started or that your child is not progressing satisfactorily, it may be time to have a meeting to change these goals. Conversely, if your child is achieving all of their goals, this may be an indicator that the goals were set too low for your child. IEP teams may find it easier to address this component by framing the discussion around specific questions. For example, the IEP team, which includes the parent, might ask itself these 3 questions. 1. How will the child's progress be measured? 2. When will the child's progress be measured? And 3. How well will the child need to perform in order to achieve his or her stated IEP goals? I'm going to turn this over now to Karen.
Now we're going to talk about transition goals and inclusion for transition and lifestyle. Here are some statistics that parents need to be aware of. After high school, 70% of students with disabilities are underemployed, underemployed, unemployed, or stay home. We need to prepare our children for life after high school. Another statistic is that youth with previous paid work experience were 4.53 times more likely to achieve integrated competitive employment. So it's really important that our kids receive this type of training while they're still in school. 73.3% of students receiving transition services starting at age 14 become employed versus 45.2, which is a much lower number, at receiving transition services starting at age 16. So the younger you start, the better, and we need to focus on independence as early as we possibly can. And most importantly, the highest predictor of positive student outcomes after high school is high expectations from parents. These are the 4 major factors that have the greatest influence on achieving positive outcomes. So the first one is inclusion in opportunities in general education. And that means classes and extracurricular activities with non-disabled peers. Meaningful work experience. This can include job shadowing, internships, volunteering, or paid work experience. Independent living skills. Life skills required to live independently. Self-care, including personal hygiene, health advocacy, and what to do in an emergency. Also, cooking meals and planning, learning how to manage finances, community safety, and transportation training. Recognizing where supports are needed and learning how to advocate for them. That's one of the things that our students really need to learn, is how to ask for help when they need it. And student support. Network of family, friends, educators, and agencies that provide services to facilitate transition. Another student support that's really important is inclusion with their peers, not just at school, but also in the community. So if you sign up for emails from SPAN for upcoming training and regional events, we have workshops and webinars, teleconferences, and conferences focusing on transition and a variety of other topics. So Debbie's going to now conduct another poll. Debbie?
Okay, thanks, Karen. So, next poll, we'd like to know, is your child included? So, are they included in your family events, school events, and community events? Click all that apply. Okay, so 69% of you, 70% of you have voted or answered. I'll give you another couple seconds. I think this is a really important question, and I think it's wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and close it so that you can see what I see, which is that 92% of you include your children in your family events, which is great, and they have some kind of school activities. And 59% of you include your children in community events and activities, and I think that's awesome. So now we're going to hear from Brenda, who's going to tell us her inclusion journey who's going to share her inclusion journey with her son with us.
Thank you, Debbie.
Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brenda Figueroa, and I will be sharing my son Alberto's story of his journey to inclusion. We moved to our town in hopes of getting a chance to create a strong bond in the community. As a parent, I was looking for a sense of belonging. I have always had a clear picture of what my son's strengths and weaknesses were. So because one of his strengths was the desire to socialize, I felt that in a smaller school district, this would be something that would be easier to work with him. However, at the time, the child study team wouldn't look past Norberto's diagnosis and were eager to place him in an out-of-district school. Initially, Norberto was in a very restrictive environment. It was a school for children on the autism spectrum, and there were no opportunities to be included with typical peers. I tried with our recreation department here in our town, but they also couldn't see past his autism. So for 2 years, we focused on academics and behavior. After this, Norberto was placed in a satellite program that, although it was a self-contained program in an out-of-district placement, it was housed in a public school, but more importantly, there were opportunities for inclusion. These opportunities provided Norberto the chance to build friendships, develop language, and improve academically and socially. For middle school, we selected a similar program. However, within 2 months, the program proved to be very different than what was promised, and the only opportunity for inclusion was lunch. It was a step back, and Norberto felt it. Even our home district agreed that it was not what Norberto needed. Norberto even started to exhibit behaviors because he felt so restricted. So we set out to look for a new placement, one that could truly follow his IEP and where he could be truly included. While searching for a new program, I received a call from our Director of Special Services. He said he had made changes to the program in our district's middle school and encouraged me to look at it. Given that the out-of-district placements I was finding were so restrictive and Norberto wanted the chance to be like any other teenager, I decided to give our school district a chance. I'm not going to say that there haven't been differences in opinions and struggles along the way, but the school district and I have built a strong collaborative relationship. Norberto's supports include modifications to the curriculum, assistive technology, extra set of books, tutoring, modified special assignments, and a behavior intervention plan. Norberto's areas of strength are math, technology, and sports. His area of weakness is language. Norberto's reading level is nowhere close to his typical peers, but this doesn't stop him from being included with proper supports and modifications. So what have we gained from inclusion? As a family, we finally feel like we belong. We don't feel like outsiders anymore in our town. What has Norberto gained? Language, not just vocabulary, but the ability to initiate conversations. He has gained confidence and self-determination. He has grown academically because now everyone has higher expectations. More importantly, he has gained friendships. Everyone knows Norberto in school, and that makes him happy. Last year, I had a classmate of his come up to me and say, "Are you Norberto's mom? He's such a cool kid." It is moments like these that make every single struggle worth it. What does inclusion in school look like for Norberto? I believe these pictures speak for themselves. Norberto fully participated in all 8th grade graduation activities, including an overnight 2-day class trip to Boston, prom and graduation. His graduation was amazing because Norberto received the loudest cheers from his classmates and audience, louder than for the football players. Last year, Norberto received his varsity letter. He loves competing, and as the photo on the right shows, he also loves the attention he gets from the girls. But inclusion is not just about school. Next slide. Inclusion is a way of living. Norberto is part of a family, and as a member of the family, he participates in family activities, he is responsible for his chores, and he is always encouraged to help others. Norberto is also part of a community. He attends community events, and he works in the community. As I mentioned before, Norberto likes to socialize. In these pictures, you can see him doing what he loves, hanging out with friends. Next slide. As a parent, I encourage you to help your child embark on their inclusion journey. Remember, nobody can go back and start a new beginning, but anyone can start today and make a new ending. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Karen?
So it's very important that parents play an active role in planning for inclusion for their child. So we see here two different columns with experiences. Do we want our children to experience the first column, belonging, contribution, connection, respect, acceptance, fulfillment, and appreciation? Or do we want them to not, we're hoping they will not experience isolation, loneliness, shame, pain, helplessness, low self-esteem, anger, or rejection. So Stephanie's going to speak about next steps. Stephanie?
Thank you, Karen. We have provided you with an overview of information, as well as Brenda and Norberto's story of how he is thriving in an inclusive setting. Now is your time to start thinking about your next steps in creating an inclusion program for your child. Think about how you can work with your district to start inclusion early and help educate other parents. See if your district has a special education parent advisory group, or a CPAG, and how you can become involved. Look into participating in activities outside of school with your child, perhaps community or sports programs that are inclusive. Make sure that your goals focus on increasing independence and opportunities for increasing inclusion. If you want more information, visit Swift School's website for examples of effective inclusion. And the website, I believe, is in the chat box. Check out their videos to see instructional methods in action. And visit the SPAN website for upcoming workshops and start upcoming events at www.spannj.org. And now back to Karen.
I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this webinar today. And after the webinar is over, a survey will pop up. If you could please complete the survey, we would appreciate that. I would like to remind everyone that we do have resources for you to download, and they're in your control panel on the right part of your screen. And I'd like to thank the START team, and especially to Brenda for sharing her personal story. So you can contact the SPAN START project at start@spannj.org. I'd like to thank everyone for your time, and now we're going to take a couple of questions.
Thank you, Karen. We have quite a bit of questions and comments coming in, and please have those comment. The first question we would like to ask is coming from Kathy, and Kathy would like to know, I asked child study team to include specific information about how my child was performing academically in his PLAF, present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. They included some things, but not all. Is there anything I can do about that other than writing a statement to be included under parental concerns?
Stephanie, would you like to take that? Stephanie?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, I'm sorry. I was just trying to get something. Yeah, they really should have a meeting to review. Parental concerns and parental input is an important component of the PLAF. However, they really do need to revisit the conversation with the child study team to discuss the strengths and weaknesses of their child and what helps their child learn, what limits or interferes with their learning, and how their disability affects their ability to be involved. Another important component to that is they really should be looking at the data from evaluations. And so I would encourage the parent to have another meeting, probe more, gain more information, and then take a look at what the students' challenges are and what is holding the child study team back from discussing inclusive opportunities for their child. And then the parent should really have further conversations to try to come up with the right supplementary aids and services, modifications and accommodations that are needed. So I hope that answers the question.
Anybody else have any feedback on that question? Okay. Monique, did you have another question? Or
We do. We have several questions. And this question is coming from Sharon Lee. And she wants to bring self-help care skill development into this conversation. For example, about making and keeping appointments, transportation to and from these appointments, specific health tasks like catheterization and insulin pump management, carbohydrate counting, putting braces on and off, skin care, etc. And I would imagine that she would think from the time that you enter school into transition out of school.
so I guess I'm not clear. What is there a question, or is that just a comment that she's thinking that these are things that should
Well,
be included?
How do you include these? Like, where are the areas if you're going to be talking about student support and student skill development, when you're talking about children that may have healthcare needs?
Okay.
How do you include, and as well, where are these type of supports included throughout the IEP or 504?
Okay. Karen, would you like to jump in on that one?
Debbie, I can speak from experience.
Okay. Brenda?
Okay. Yes, my niece requires nurse services, specialized nurse services, due to a spinal cord injury, and she received, it wasn't in school, but she received special OT to show her how to catheterize herself, and then it was included in the IHP plan for her nurse to follow through, and that's how one of the self-help skills that we were able to teach her. In terms of my son Norberto, since he was little, schedules was something that he was very good at. So we started with picture schedules, then we started with school planners and him holding himself accountable, and now we're up to Google Calendar, and he uses it from his phone. So there are ways to do it, and in Norberto's case, it was part of his IEP.
And I think Karen mentioned earlier, in terms of modifying schedules or using or providing inclusive opportunities in the classroom for the younger children, even keeping an eye on, or if they're old enough to tell time, letting the class know when it's time to change classes, or in terms of keeping up with schedules or being in charge or giving them more responsibilities in the classroom.
And all of these things can be mentioned within an individual health plan that can go into the IEP with goals, but these are also goals and things that parents need to think of as your children continue to grow, and how is this going to be addressed once they become 21? How independent are they going to be into doing all of those things? So it definitely are considerations and questions that need to be asked throughout the lifespan of their educational supports, but also when they transition.
And you want to also make sure that they're supplementary aids and services, and also make sure that they are, despite what health challenges they have, that they are still able to access the curriculum. So, it's also looking at, one of the things we talked about before was the, environmental accommodations, behavioral support, things like that, parent training and staff training. And another key piece to this as well is making sure that the staff is properly trained to help with the needs of that particular child as well.
Okay, another question, Tatiana?
Sure. We have the following question is asked by Greg. Greg, referring to a transition discussion. He says, you mentioned getting some transportation training. Where and how can I obtain information for my child? Great question.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to answer for experience because I'm sorry, I'm right in the midst of this. My school district, if Norberto requires transportation training, they are able to contract Bergen County Special Services School District, who has a program for transportation training. Transportation training includes walking and crossing the street, contacting Access Link for services, safety, and at least in Norberto's case, because of modern times, I'm hoping to put Uber and Lyft there as services that he can access. So,
and again, these are all services and supports that should be within your transition plan, and also the thought of, is your child going to have to access public transportation and use these, or are they going to drive? So you have to look at the complete circle of that, and you also have the opportunity to access your county-wide independent living centers, who also provide services around transportation, travel, and those type of things to encourage independence.
Other attendees that chiming in and recommending, in addition, the response to this question would be also to speak with a case manager in your school district. That would be your first stop, of course. Great comments, everyone. Thank you so much. We have other questions we would like to address at this time. One from Jennifer. Jennifer states, I believe that everyone would benefit if my child's district had all staff members go through an educational training to help understand his disabilities better and how to assist him. I have found a course and suggested the benefit of it or any other that they found. To date, the district has not pursued it. Do I have back in the law or etc. To assist that this part of the with his IEP?
I would say yes. I would say to put it into the IEP as part of supplementary aids and services, the training, there, you know, as I talked about before, a successful inclusive program includes professional development for both special education and general education teachers. So I would have it placed within that section of the IEP, you know, with the discussion. Another thing that school districts have are professional development days. So also talk with, you know, within your district to find out what they have for professional development. This might be something that they can discuss. If your district has a CPAG, a Special Education Parent Advisory Group, they can also follow up with them as well to identify if other parents in the district would also like for this staff to receive training on certain topics. So I hope that helps.
Great. Okay, we have another question from Meg. Now in high school, it's really gotten hard for her son to be included because the school says he needs to be responsible for the same level of subject matter as his regular ed peers. He's on a 3rd grade reading level now in the 9th grade. Is my child responsible for the same level of testing, classwork, and homework in a classroom as the rest of his class?
I think we can all say absolutely. I don't think so.
Yeah,
No.
absolutely. And just make sure that the right modifications to he has the right modifications and supports.
And like I mentioned, Alberto's reading level is very low, probably that of a 3rd grade, if anything. And he is included. I mean, it's modified. It's about exposure to curriculum. So an example I like to give parents is if in 9th grade you're studying Romeo and Juliet, he might not be able to answer what are the social implications of that time, but he can definitely learn that Romeo and Juliet was written by Shakespeare, who Shakespeare was, the time period, and different aspects. So with special assignments and modified curriculum, yes, they can be part of that.
Right. So I think, Meg, that's your question, that yes, he is supposed to be, he is responsible, but modified curriculum to where his level of reading is.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. You guys were great.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. One more.
Okay. One more. Okay. Here's the question from Miriam. Is it legal for child study team to only recommend for a child to be transferred to another school that offers a special education teacher and not the school where he's attending? We often hear a question like that or get questions like that, right?
Educational placement is a team-based decision. It's parental input. You know, IDEA specifies that parental involvement is very important in the formation of the IEP. So there needs to be actually a conversation on that part with parent involvement. Perhaps parent can do observations herself of various classroom settings to see where she thinks her child may best benefit from the educational setting. but it's really not appropriate for the child study team to tell the parent where they think the child belongs. It needs to be a shared conversation with parental input.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
Yes, we have a ton of questions. If I might go ahead and ask a few more. My 14-year-old has bouts of aggression.
I'm sorry, Tatiana, I don't want to cut you off, and you can go ahead and ask your question, but for people who have to go, I just wanted to let everybody know, or just to mention, that you can always contact the START project if you have more questions that we're not able to answer right here. And also, if you want to hear a final word from Norberto, you can go to the START website where you clicked on the registration link for this inclusion webinar, and you'll find a little word from Norberto that we weren't able to include in this presentation. So anyway, Tatiana, go ahead and ask your question. I'm sorry.
Sure, no problem. Selena is asking, my 14-year-old has bouts of aggression, punching and shoving. Can he be included?
Yes. Why? I don't understand why he wouldn't be included. We have to come from the mindset of least restrictive environment. That's what Karen talked about earlier in the webinar. Is school districts, parents, we need to think from the mindset of what we go from the least restrictive environment when thinking of the educational placement. We also go back to talking about the right supports and services. Has the child had an FBA? If they do have a
functional behavior assessment.
A functional behavioral assessment. If they've had an FBA, has a behavioral intervention plan been put in place? Has there been proper training of staff on that behavior intervention plan, and is it being implemented? Those are the kind of things you have to look at in this particular case. So I'm not sure, given the limited information we have, but we should always come from a place of, yes, they can be included. Now let's figure out how. So that's my take on it.
I think that's correct. I mean, obviously we don't have all the information, but just to say that my child has behaviors, and that's no reason to prevent them from being included. There are supports that can be provided. So what you want to do, like Stephanie says, and Monique says, you want to go back and have that conversation and say, okay, well, what can we do about this? Okay, my child has behaviors, so what are we going to do next? What's next?
Right. Well, and again, if there's behaviors, I would want to know what's causing the behaviors, and that all goes back to a functional behavior assessment to see what the antecedent is that's causing the behavior.
Yeah. Bottom line is, behaviors by themselves do not should not prevent your child from being included.
Yeah.
I have.
Okay. This is
one more.
Yeah, this is because we're at 103 now.
All
so
right, this is going to be the last one, and it's
okay.
This is from Diana, and she's asking if inclusion can be a part of a preschool program. She has a 3.5-year-old.
Yes, inclusion should start as earliest as possible to create an inclusive setting for your child. It begins, as Karen mentioned earlier in the webinar, it begins at birth. I mean, inclusion should really begin as soon as possible, and to work with the preschool program on creating inclusive opportunities for your child. Yes.
And the second part of that was they are currently in a special education preschool program because of language.
Okay.
Okay. And that still should not deter from being included in a regular preschool program.
They will learn from typical peers. There's modeling that happens, and the best way for a child to learn language in an educational setting is to have typical peer models. So perhaps there is the one-to-one speech therapy and group speech therapy sessions, but there should also be opportunities for interaction with other peers for peer modeling. So
and there you go. Back to you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Just one thing I would like to add, this is Karen. Every conversation about inclusion at the IEP before placement is decided should start with what would it look like with this child in a general education classroom, and then what supports are needed or goals do we need to create to have them be successful there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where every conversation, that's where we should start, and then work from there, going down the continuum. Maybe we need to pull out or bring in supports, but always start the conversation with, gee, what would it look like for my child to be in the classroom all day long with his typical peers, and what do we need to do to get them there?
Yes.
Tatiana, I don't know if you wanted to mention something else about the contact NJ. I'm not familiar with that acronym, so if you wanted to speak a little bit about that for a minute.
Sure. Several of our colleagues from SPAN are also on this webinar, one of them being Mary Gerg, and she's reminding us that we have one of the projects that SPAN is involved is New Jersey Inclusive Child Care Program, and they are specifically working on supporting and sustaining inclusive child care programs, and they could help with preschool inclusion and specific questions. And I would be more than happy to put their her contact information and additional information about the work that we do around inclusive child care programs throughout the state in their chat box in just a second.
Okay. All right, Karen, do you have any final comments or thoughts?
No, I just want to thank everyone again for participating and attending our webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.